Hey fellow tankers, Mobius Y here with another video for World of Tanks console. So here it is, finally, the review in an episode of Tank Talk for the Tier 9 WZ-111 Model 1-4 Chinese heavy tank. Also known as the Tier 9 Way Too Many Ones heavy tank. So, a one-sentence synopsis of how I felt after playing this tank. This thing's quite the machine. It has a lot of similarities with the Tier 9 Russian T-10. And if you haven't seen my review of the T-10, which was made back when the T-10 was still called the IS-8 in-game, if you've seen that, then you'll know why I love the T-10. It's fairly mobile, it's got a nice punchy gun, it hits pretty decently hard. The armor isn't fantastic, but it's just troll enough where it can throw people off. And the WZ-111 1-4 shares a lot of those characteristics. But there's some things that it does a little bit differently, and there's some things that it does a little bit better. Of course, the trade-off is that it does some things a little bit worse as well. Now, it was actually pretty tough finding two games to share with this tank review. This first one on Erlenberg is actually nothing really special. It kind of just shows off a bit of the camo factor of the WZ-111. It's a fairly low-profile tank. A lot of the Chinese heavies are like that. I think the 110 is honestly the tallest one out of the four. The WZ and the 113 are fairly low-profile, not much taller than medium tanks. So you'll see that I'm able to pull off some shots and some maneuvers just on the edge of some people's spotting range, and I don't get detected. You'll also see this thing's mobility, as I'm able to relocate fairly quickly when I need to. Apart from that, pretty much just how punchy the gun is. There's a couple shots that I make where, for example, it's on some angled armor on a couple tanks, but the penetration on the top gun for the WZ-111 1-4 was good enough where if the round struck home, the round went through and did some damage for me. So, a couple key things about the WZ-111 1-4. I'm going to go over the bad things first. The very first thing that bugs me about the WZ-111 1-4 is that, similar to the T-10, its frontal hull armor is kind of trash for its tier. It will stand up and cause problems for Tier 9 medium tanks that have really low penetration guns. For example, the T-54 and the Object 430 version 2. Those only have about 200 millimeters of penetration. Basically anything that has the M46 Patton's level of penetration with its top gun, which is only about 219 or less. But anything else that mounts something like a 105 millimeter L7 or any fully upgraded Tier 9 heavy tank will have no problem punching holes through the frontal hull of this thing. Unless they hit a really, really bad ricochet angle and it's a borderline auto bounce, they're pretty much just going to go through and damage you. The second thing that I didn't really appreciate too much about this tank is that, again, like the T-10, it doesn't have very good gun depression. So there were times where I'd be on the move, for example, and right when I think I have a really good shot, I just hit a little bump or I hit a little depression just at the wrong moment, and it causes the hull of the tank to kind of just lift up just slightly, and it throws the gun way off. So a bit of a frustrating thing. It definitely takes some getting used to. This tank only has 5 degrees of gun depression, just like the T-10. So that can be a bit of a hurdle to get over. And pretty much the only other thing that I found a major hassle with this tank is that the top gun can be a little bit uncooperative sometimes. It doesn't have the greatest accuracy. It's definitely acceptable accuracy. It's a little bit below average, but the gun handling itself is pretty poor. When this tank is moving and when you're kicking it up to top speeds, the dispersion will make your reticule basically the size of your screen, pretty much. And the aim time is fairly kind of average for a heavy tank at these tiers. So it just takes a while to aim in if you've been moving any decent distance or at any decent speed. The T-10 doesn't really have that problem. Its top gun, its 122 millimeter M68, actually has really good dispersion values. Even when you're in sniper view and you're zoomed in fully and you're kicking that tank up to about 35, 40 kilometers an hour, the dispersion is actually quite tight. It's not much bigger than the health and reload bars just on the left and the right of your reticule. With the WZ, it's not the case. As you can see, just even the slightest increments of movement make the accuracy drop significantly. So it takes a while to line up and aim with this gun. However, to compensate for that, the really nice thing about this gun is that it hits freaking hard. The alpha on this thing is the same as the 12.8 centimeter guns, or the 128 millimeter guns, if you want to call them that, on the German heavy tanks, like the E75, the VK Bravo, and the Mauschen, all at Tier 9. The only other heavy tanks at Tier 9, and even Tier 10, that do more damage per shot are the E100 with its 150 millimeter gun, and the Japanese Type 4 and Type 5 heavy tanks with their 140 and 150 millimeter guns. The 140 millimeter gun in particular has 600 alpha damage, for example. So it does a full 100 points more alpha damage than the WZ or even the German heavies. So despite having to aim in for quite some time, this tank can easily outtrade with just about everything on the battlefield, save tank destroyers or heavy tanks with equally or higher caliber guns, simply because they do as much, if not more, damage per shot than this tank's top 130 millimeter does. But something like an M103 or a Conqueror or an STI or even a T10, if you simply trade shot for shot, where they hit you once and you hit them once, and then you both wait till you reload, and then again you trade shots again once you're both reloaded, chances are you'll kill them first, because you just do more damage per shot on average. So that's a really nice thing that I liked about this tank. Another positive about this tank is it's very mobile, especially with the top engine. The very top engine on this tank is the same as the top engine on the WZ-120. So there's a lot of crossover modules as you grind this tank out, not just from previous heavy tanks in the Chinese heavy line, like the 110, for example, but also from the medium tank line. So it's really nice to be able to either have an easier time fully upgrading your WZ-120 after you complete the Chinese heavy line, or being able to have an easier time with your WZ-111 1.4 after completing the medium tank line. In this case, I did the medium tank line a long time ago, so I was able to get the top engine on the WZ for free. And it's really what makes this tank stand out compared to other heavy tanks. There are definitely some other fairly mobile heavy tanks at Tier 9, like the M103 or the Conqueror, but compared to the WZ or even the T10, they really don't compare. It's almost like night and day, to be totally honest, how consistently the T10, and especially the WZ, can accelerate to 30, 40 kilometers an hour, even getting up to 50 kilometers an hour on favorable terrain. It's a really nice aspect of this tank, and it's part of the reason why I liked it so much. It just added so much extra versatility to a tank that is of a class that's normally expected for it to not have that kind of mobility. So, an okay game on Erlenberg. Only 8 penetrations for 2,881 damage. Nothing too fantastic. Team Sonic X was my platoon mate that game, playing his Type 4 heavy tank. He was kind of struggling this night as we played this. Unfortunately, the Type 4 heavy just doesn't seem to agree with a lot of players. It's kind of a poop tank to play. So, a couple other things about the WZ that are good for it. Its frontal turret armor is actually quite good. It definitely has a couple weak spots on the very top of the turret, namely the 2 cupolas that sit on the very top, as well as right above the gun mantlet. It suffers the same kind of problem that the T10 does. It's a pretty easy penetration if people are able to land a shot there. And really accurate guns, especially on other heavy tanks like the Conqueror or the FE215B or even the M103 and T110E5, they can nail it repeatedly without really breaking a sweat. So they can constantly do some damage to you. So when grinding the WZ-111 Model 1.4, this is a screenshot that I took quite some time ago before I researched any of the packages. So when I first bought the WZ-111, as you can see here, the very first package is only 24,200 XP to get off of stock. It's definitely worth free XPing that, because the next package above that, where you get the 100mm 62-100T, is the same XP amount. So if you free XP off of the stock package to the very first one on the WZ-111, the WZ-111 25T, then the very next package above it will cost nothing, because it has modules on it from the previous tank. In fact, the XP to research the previous package is strictly for the trap upgrade, the WZ-111 Model 4 tracks that you can see in the bottom there. Everything else, pretty much everything else, comes off of the 110 before it. The engine, the gun, the 100mm 62-100T, and the IS-3 turret basically comes off the 110. After that, it'll be about another 24,000 XP to research the third package, the WZ-111 100T, and that gives you your first major turret upgrade. That gives you the WZ-111 turret upgrade, which is really nice. The package after that is where the grind really kicks in. It's a lot of XP for that top gun. It's over 60,000 XP, and it can seem like a huge long haul, and you might consider not going for it, but trust me, you definitely want to. That gun totally makes this tank. After that, the final upgrade, the WZ-111 Model 4 at the very end there. For me, it costs nothing because it's just an engine upgrade, and it only adds, I believe, about 20 horsepower compared to the previous package. So it can definitely be very tempting to skip it, but I strongly recommend maybe not before researching the 113. Maybe you can save up enough XP to research the 113 first, but I highly recommend keeping the WZ-111 in your garage and accumulating enough XP to research that final package, because it's an engine upgrade that is on the WZ-120 Tier 9 medium tank, and that will just make that grind a lot easier. Now, taking a look at the packages in the game, the reason why I highly recommend skipping off the stock package is because the stock gun is the 122mm D25T. This is the top gun on the Tier 7 IS-2. So similar to the T10, it's a really crappy gun to be starting off this tank with. You also don't have the engine upgrade, so the WZ will feel probably a little bit sluggish. The second package, that's where you get your track upgrade and actually a small radio upgrade, so that's why it will cost 24,000 XP to research that. And once you do that, this third package here, the Model 2 package, should be pretty much free, because it shares the same modules. It's just a gun upgrade from the previous package, where you get the 100mm 62-100T that is used on the fully upgraded 110. So the sooner you get this, the better off you'll be, because this gun is actually pretty solid, even on a Tier 9. It doesn't do a great amount of alpha damage, but it has pretty respectable gun handling, good penetration for a tier for a gun that's used on a top package for a Tier 8 heavy tank, so it'll serve you well. And then you'll have to get about another 24,000 XP for this fourth package, where you get the turret upgrade, the WZ-111 turret. It's just a lot better than the IS-3's, better frontal armor profile, especially around the gun mantlet, but it still shares very similar weak spots to the IS-3's turret. And then the big one, as I said, is the 60-some-odd thousand that you'll need to get this 130mm 59-130T gun. This is the second to last package. That's the only upgrade on this package over the previous one, and it will require a lot of XP to get it. If you have some free XP after getting off of the stock package, save it for this. I wouldn't worry too much about spending free XP to get the turret upgrade on the previous package. Definitely save it for the gun upgrade. And lastly, you get the 12-150 LT engine upgrade on the very final package, which upgrades another about a 20 horsepower boost to the engine, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually makes a difference to the acceleration and being able to consistently hit this tank's top speed. So let's take a look at some of the hard stats on this final package. As I said, the engine power is only about 20 HP more than the previous one, giving you a total of 600 horsepower. That's not too bad. It gives you a decent power to weight ratio. This tank isn't terribly heavy. It's only about 40 to 50 tons, to be totally honest. So other tanks definitely outweigh you, but you do have a pretty good power to weight ratio. It still kind of struggles going uphill. You will notice that the speed drops consistently, and dramatically, I should say. But when you're going downhill, or even when you're on flat and favorable terrain, you'll find yourself kicking up to 40 kilometers an hour pretty easily, even 50 kilometers an hour. So the 130 millimeter gun, it only has a rate of fire of 4.29, which isn't great. Your reload is slower than that of an M103, definitely slower than that of a Conqueror, and it's just a tad slower than that of a T10. A T10 will reload about 1 second faster than you. But as I said, it compensates for that in other areas, and we'll get to that in a second. The penetration of the standard AP is 244. That's pretty good. It's not stellar. Other tanks definitely have more. The T10 fully upgraded gets about 258, but it's more than enough. If you know your weak points, this will go through all of them, no problem. So long as you don't hit them at really weird angles or just take really crappy shots, that'll do the job. The heat penetration is 340. That's more than enough to, again, try for weaker areas. If you just need to make your shots count, you can load some heat rounds and shoot through the front of weaker areas of, say, a T110 E3, or just shoot through the turret of an E100, no problem. And the alpha damage on both of those rounds is 490. As I said, this is the second highest alpha damage out of all heavy tanks at Tier 9. Only the Japanese Type 4 Heavy has more alpha damage with its 140 millimeter and 150 millimeter guns. The German heavy tanks have the same alpha damage with their 12.8 centimeters, so they will trade the same amount of damage for you. So ideally, you want to be trading shot for shot with everything else, if possible. The HE only has 65 millimeters of penetration, more than enough, and the alpha damage is 640, so you can hit really weakly armored targets for a lot of damage. Now, the aiming time is 2.9. That's the same as the fully upgraded T10, fairly average for a lot of higher tier heavy tanks, and the accuracy is 0.4. That's a bit below the decent average of 0.38, but it's not terrible, and it's definitely workable. And as you saw in the previous gameplay, it will still allow you to land your shots. Sometimes it will troll you at the longer ranges. In fact, it will do it fairly consistently, especially if you're shooting really far away at really small targets. The track traverse speed is 28 degrees per second, pretty decent for a Tier 9 heavy tank. The turret traverse is 26 degrees per second, so if you're turning the chassis one way and turning the turret the other way, the turret will not be able to keep up, so it will actually turn with the chassis just a little bit. The turret armor is one of the strong aspects of this tank, as previously mentioned, 230 millimeters at the front, and that's pretty much only in the gun mantlet and around that area, but it's pretty strong. It will stand up to a lot of other things shooting at you, so hull down with this tank behind small rubble piles or just small pieces of debris or whatever you can find is actually a really hot commodity. The view range is 400 meters, which is very respectable on a Tier 9 heavy tank, especially one like the Chinese, where you would expect it to be kind of blind. The signal range is 750 meters, so you'll be able to communicate with your whole team as to who's spotted and where at all times. So let's go ahead and take a look at the supplies and equipment that I had equipped on the WZ-111 Model 1.4 in order to make it work for me. Starting off with the supplies, I mounted 25 standard AP rounds. This is more than enough. It was very rare that I found myself running out of ammo in this tank for two reasons. One, there was a lot of cases where I simply had bad games and I died super early, or had decent games and died super early. Most of the time I just died before I could shoot enough rounds, but also because there just simply won't be enough damage to go around for you to fire all these off. I mounted 12 heat rounds. This is more than plenty. I found that I wasn't using these nearly as much in the latter half of the grind. Once I had about 100,000 XP and it was working towards another 100,000 XP to research the 113, I didn't really use the heat very much. They are definitely useful for those situations where you have to eke out just a little bit more damage. Make sure that your shots count. Definitely bring a bunch of those. And for high explosive, I brought 3. Again, didn't really use these very much. I just feel that the reload time on this tank is not really worth switching to high explosive in order to put like 1 or 2 shots in thinly armored targets, like for example a grill or a waffle, because those situations are just too few and far between. So I mostly just shot AP. Especially for the latter half while I played this tank. I did shoot quite a bit of heat. Well, not quite a bit. I did shoot some heat in in my earliest parts of the grind for this tank, but that I weaned myself off of that the more I played this tank. Consumables, pretty standard for a tier 9 tank for me. Large repair kit, large first aid kit, automatic fire extinguisher. Definitely put an automatic fire extinguisher on this tank because it is easy to set fire from the sides and especially the rear. And definitely I highly recommend putting a large first aid kit if you can afford it, because the driver is very exposed from the front. As I mentioned, that frontal hull armor is not very good, so it's very easy for him to die. Equipment that I used: large caliber tank gun rammer, improved ventilation, and vertical stabilizer. Pretty standard here. You could go with optics if you so chose, but I feel that it is much more important to lower the reload time of the gun. So hence why I went with the gun rammer and the improved ventilation. And the gun handling, as I said, is pretty poop, so you want to try and make that better. Vertical stabilizer is the way to go. An alternative that you could also put on instead of something like vents would be either wet ammo rack, if you really dislike how easily this thing can be ammo racked, or even a gun lane drive to help with the aim time and further improve the gun handling, as previously mentioned. So that about sums it up for some detailed stats and a look at the packages on the WZ-111 Model 1.4. Let's go ahead and take a look at tanks.gg for some more detailed armor viewing, and we'll take a look at the hit zones of the modules. Okay, so here we are on tanks.gg. Remember, tanks.gg uses PC stats, specific PC stats, so this might not be 100% accurate to the console version, but it still gives a really good idea of where you do and don't want to shoot certain tanks. So, as mentioned previously, the front of the turret, 230 millimeters, especially in the lower areas, and behind the gun mantlet, that is really tough to pen because there's a big, thick blob of spaced armor there, 250 millimeters of spaced armor. So that will stand up to most anything. The front hull, I did say it is weak, but the nice thing about it is that the lower plate is just as thick as the upper front plate. It's just not sloped as well, so the effective armor value isn't as good. But at sharp angles, people will have trouble penning this thing. It's not a super easy near automatic pen like, say, the Tiger 2's lower plate, for example. So you can get some troll bounces there, and people will aim for it a lot as well. So you want to try and hide that as best as possible. You want to try and hide the entire hull as best as possible. It does have the kind of pike nose like a lot of the Russian tanks does, but as I said, the effective armor is not very good. It's only 120 millimeters, so the effective values you're getting is about 220 at a lot of angles. So as I said, everything at tier 9 except low pen medium tanks and light tanks will have no problem going through. Things like a T54 or an Object 430 version 2, which only have 200 pen, will have trouble. And lower tiers, obviously, if they don't have very high pen guns, for example a T44 or an IS-6, they will have trouble penning this as well. But pretty much any TD shouldn't have a problem. Now, one huge thing that I really, really like about the WZ-111 Model 1.4, the side armor is 80 millimeters. It's really flat, so if anybody comes around onto your side, it's a pretty easy pen at a flat angle because it's only 80 millimeters, excuse me. But it makes it really good for side scraping, especially reverse side scraping if you can get that down pat. In fact, I would almost say reverse side scraping in this tank is almost more effective than simple side scraping. But it is still pretty easy to over angle when in a side scrape or reverse side scrape, and you will know immediately if you're overdoing it because somebody will just pen you very easily. So the rear of the tank, right here in the engine deck where you can easily get caught fire, it's only 70 millimeters, so anything will go through that. The very back of the turret, it's a 60 millimeter plate and it's not sloped pretty much at all, so that's an easy spot to get penned as well. And there's a good chance that you could either hit the ammo rack or possibly even hit the loader, who is somewhere on the right side of the turret over here. So you do got to be careful of that. So that's generally it for the WZ-111 1.4. I'm not really going to look into these kind of detailed stats. As I said, they're more akin to PC stats, but we'll do a slight comparison of what you might expect in comparison to the T10. The DPM of the WZ-111 is supposedly worse, but as I said, you have higher alpha damage per shot, so you should be able to outtrade. So long as you're not letting somebody get the best of you and shoot you more than you shoot them back, you will do more damage to them than they can do to you. So that's generally it for the detailed look at tanks.gg. As I said, you want to try and hide this hull. It's very easy for fully upgraded Tier 9 heavy tanks to pen this. It's very easy for Tier 9 tank destroyers to pen this. And certain medium tanks, like, for example, the Leopard prototype or the Centurion 7-1, will penetrate this no problem, because they're sporting like good 260 millimeters of penetration. They won't have a problem with that. So you want to try and just keep nice and hull down, keep the front of your turret pointed towards them, and just be aware that it's best to kind of shake your turret back and forth if you remember to, unlike me, who had a hard time remembering that, to make it harder to hit these little cupolas here. So let's go ahead and take a look at where the modules are using images from WOTinfo.net. Okay, so here on the front of the WZ-111-1.4, it doesn't show it very well in these images, but the ammo rack is kind of damageable from the front, more so from the side. There'll be a clip a little bit later, a video clip a little bit later, showing the module viewer from our garage. So as I mentioned, the lower plate is kind of a weak point. If a tank is right in your face, like face-hugging you, for example, that's harder to pen because they're trying to shoot downwards at it, and it's a much sharper angle. So they'll have a difficult time with that, but the farther away they are, the easier it will be to pen. And of course, the two cupolas are weak points as well. And the driver will die a lot. If they land shots up in that middle area, right beneath the turret, the driver's pretty much gone. So that's why I recommend bringing a large large first aid kit, excuse me. On the left side, basically anywhere in the back of the turret is where ammo rack is, and underneath the turret, it's a little tough to see on this image, but directly underneath the turret in the hull, it's very easy to damage the ammo rack there as well. You've also got the gunner at the front of the turret on the left side. Anybody who is just a little bit off center of where you're pointing can hit that pretty easily, get a pretty easy penetration, and then just make your gun handling go to complete crap. The back of the tank, as I said, the entire back of the turret is where there's ammo rack, so if you get the chance to shoot there, go for it. Being shot in the ammo rack and having damaged ammo rack absolutely cripples the reload on this tank. It's over 20 seconds long. You've also got the entire engine deck in the very back of the hull, so very easy for it to get set fire there. Try and shoot that if you have... especially if you have an autoloader and can plant several shots into that back area there. And then the right side of the Wheezy, again, very back areas of the turret, that's where the ammo rack is. And this area on the right, also in front of the ammo rack, is where the loader is. So you knock out either one of those and this thing's reload is bye-bye. They're not going to be shooting you anytime soon. And of course, again, you can't really see it very well in this image, but underneath the turret in the hull area is where there is a lot of space for ammo rack damage. So try to aim there if you really want to cripple somebody who is playing this tank. It absolutely kills a reload, let me tell you. So, as you can see in this clip here, it was tough to see with the images that were used from WTinfo.net, but you can see that the ammo rack is just right up against the sides of the hull, pretty much right behind the tracks. So if somebody gets a flank on you and they shoot right underneath the turret, it's a near guarantee that this ammo rack is gone. By extension of that, you do need to be careful when you're playing peekaboo tactics, because you need to drive out far enough where you can get your gun out from behind your piece of cover and shoot somebody. This exposes your ammo rack very easily, and I've actually had my top popped by certain TDs sometimes. For example, an E4 shot me there once. I thought he was on reload. I poked out, almost completely side onto him, and that was pretty much the only place where he could really shoot me for an easy penetration, and he popped my top for about 1,300 health. So it's just something you got to be super cautious of when you are playing this tank. Definitely want to save your peekaboo tactics for when you're playing a bit more like a medium tank. Wait for enemies to shoot or be looking somewhere else. So you want to shoot them back when there's no way they can get their turret turned on you, get their gun on you quickly enough, or reload quickly enough for them to respond. If you are playing peekaboo tactics. If you're side scraping, you can be a little bit more careless, because the tracks and the spaced side armor right above the tracks can deflect and absorb a lot of shots, giving you the chance to back up and shoot them right in the face. So I've got another game here on Himmelsdorf. This is the kind of environment where a tank like the Wheezy really shines. You'll see the firepower capabilities of this tank, as well as the mobility of this thing, and a little bit of the turret armor come into play. Once again, platooned with Team Sonic X in this game, but he's playing the Tier 9 AMX 1390 French light tank. So he's got a 4-shot autoloader and a pretty speedy chassis to move around with it. So I know I can kind of count on him to help back me up in the later stages if I am able to keep myself alive. And we're trying to close out the game together. So on Himmelsdorf, when I'm playing a tank like this, I go to Banana Road very regularly and just kind of set up to see what's coming down that way. I very rarely stay there for too long because when several heavy tanks are coming down this way, or several assault TDs, like say a T-95 or an E3, are coming down Banana Road, I don't really feel it's very smart to stick around and try to fight them from the front. I'm always trying to look for if there's ways to either get around them or if there's a situation developing somewhere else where I'm needed. And the nice thing about a tank like this is that it's quick enough to relocate if there's a hole that needs plugging. It's maneuverable enough where it can relocate and get a bit of armor and an HP and a decent HP pool, and more importantly, a really nice gun into where it's needed more. So you saw the Fatherland penetrate me. I was overdoing the angle on the side scraping, and that's what I mean by you'll know right away when you're overdoing it on a side scrape. You do have to be cautious of that. While the sides are 80 millimeters behind the tracks, and you do have some strips of spaced armor right above them, it's still very easy to screw it up and give people a pretty easy opportunity to penetrate your sides. So if that happens, especially if you're getting shot by an autoloader, adjust immediately. Either get back into cover so that they can't shoot you at all and then adjust your angle from there, or just do it while you are out and exposed and in the middle of a firefight. So as you can see, I raced my way back across this way. This IS-3 came all the way across the middle, took out our poor IS. I wasn't able to get over here in time to help him, but I was able to stop this guy from running a little bit rampant behind our lines. Just trying to get right in his face. He gets a nice penetration on me, but not before I get a nice hit on him. So just trying to get in his face so that he can't get his gun down low enough to easily shoot me in the lower areas where he'll have an easier time to penetrate me. We both bounce each other. I looked like I hit his gun barrel, or I just hit where his driver sits at a bad angle. So I simply drove past him, hit him in the flat piece of armor right underneath his turret to finish him off. So turning around, I noticed that there is a Gorynich KV-5 coming up behind us. I sat long enough to make sure that my gun was fully aimed in so that I could pretty much neutralize the odds of me missing this shot once that Gorynich came around. I was hoping for either a fuel tank shot, or if I was aiming a bit higher, possibly a shot in the back of the turret, maybe hit his ammo rack or hurt a loader. Alas, it was not meant to be. So I know I need to get rid of this Gorynich because he's actually coming right up behind our Conqueror, and I want to try and back him up. So I'll come around, wait really long. I don't quite aim in all the way, which could have cost me if RNG did not smile on me there. But I shot, nevertheless, I took the shot a little bit early, and it went straight enough where I was able to hit him for 500 damage. So right here, there's a T-29. He fires a shot at me. I've got time. I know he's on reload, so I respond in kind with a nice 440 damaging shot. And this is one nice thing about the Wheezy, and very similarly the T-10. It's very good with its mobility and its alpha damage and its penetration capabilities, and even its frontal armor profile. You can bully lower tiers. I basically showed no fear towards that T-29. Seemed like he kind of panicked his shots on me, so I was able to cause his shot to bounce with just a little bit of wiggling. The Mutant 6 that just rushed me also kind of rushed his shot, and I was able to bounce that off fairly easily. As I said, the frontal armor profile on this tank is kind of trash for its tier, but you can cause people to throw it off. So driving through the middle here, I have shots on this heavy tank on the left. It looks like the Fatherland, but I decided to take out the Scorpion TD instead. We trade hits. Ideally, I was kind of hoping that he would not get a shot off at the same time, but considering that the Scorpion aims in better and reloads better than the Wheezy, I kind of expected to take a hit, so I figured it was worth the trade if I was going to be able to take him out of the game. Trying to line up a shot on the T-10, unfortunately, he turns at the last second and is able to absorb it into his tracks. Good play on his part. Bit of a bad shot on my part as well, to be totally honest. I did not adjust for what I could clearly see was him turning more towards my left. and I didn't adjust accordingly. So he was able to absorb that shot in my tracks. So I'm at 800 hit points. I'm essentially a two-shot for a lot of the tanks left on the other team. This STI is a one-shot, but he can if I play it wrong, if I screw up, he can easily take me out before I could get a second shot off on him if I screw it up the first time. The T10 is also fairly healthy and can definitely kill me in two shots as well. So trying to keep an eye on the map for where he's at. Team Sonic's X basically being my eyes on my left right now. The T10 comes around, tries to take a shot. Not sure who that was meant for, whether it was meant for Sonic or myself. Seemed like he rushed it just a little bit and wound up missing both of us. So tried to set up a tiny side scrape position from here as best as I could, given where I was sitting. Unfortunately, that means that that meant that the Tiger 1 was, or sorry, that meant that the T10 was easily able to take out our Tiger 1 friendly Tier 7 heavy that was behind me. So he pulls out far enough where I'm able to plant a shot into him, and I know he's going to retaliate, so at the last second I turn my hull in a different direction, and he puts his shot into my tracks, which gets absorbed for no damage. Team Sonic able to finish him off with his 4-shot autoloader from his 1390. Really good shooting from Team Sonic, taking out that T10. That pretty much eliminated one of the biggest threats they had for me right now. Poking out, did not realize that this STI moved that far forward, so he puts a shot into my side while I screw up my shot into his lower plate. And as I said, since he shot me in the side, very easy to get ammo racked at an angle like that, so he took me out no problem. Sonic is able to take out the Oho in the middle of the map, so I know I don't have to worry about two tanks rushing after me. But as you can see, the reload with a damaged ammo rack is 23.11 seconds. That's with vents, with a gun rammer, and with brothers in arms on the crew. So you want to try to protect your ammo rack as best as possible and avoid peekabooing out side on to people, because it's very, very good possibility that it would get damaged. And right before both me and Sonic rushed that STI to take him out, the M103 pokes out from the middle. I had a momentary lapse in judgment, forgot that he was there, and he takes me out before we can push on that STI. Nevertheless, Sonic and the rest of the team were able to pull off a win there, finishing off the M103 for his last little bit of health. Finishing that game, 4164 points of damage, a sniper medal, quite a few penetrations that game, totaling 11 penetrations, so able to rack up a fair amount of damage. That's one of my favorite things about this gun. Because it does so much damage per shot and it has a decent enough reload, it's actually quite easy to rack up the damage with this tank. You only need about 4 or 5 penetrations with favorable damage rolls, and you're doing as much damage as the tank has HP, if not more. The tank only has 1850 HP, so if you do nearly 500 damage for 4 shots, that's about 2,000 damage. As far as I'm concerned, you were an asset to your team that game. So that should sum it up for this Tank Talk episode for today. I'm going to actually put up more WZ-111 1.4 gameplay either sometime this weekend or possibly even for next week's videos, because I did have some other, some actual good games that I wanted to share to try and showcase how you can still play this tank effectively. Don't get me wrong, I definitely had my bad games with this tank numerous times, not even breaking 2,000 damage or only getting, 1 shot off, 2 shots off, or even a couple times doing no damage. So I definitely had my bad games with this tank, but if you treat it right, if you use it the way it's meant to be used, you can really make it sing. And if you're patient with the gun, it will serve you very well. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video and this next episode of Tank Talk as we continue down the road to the 113. The next episode will be out several weeks from now after I play about 60 to 100 games in the 113 Tier 10 Chinese heavy tank. This has been Mobius Y for World of Tanks console. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the battlefield. As always, happy tanking.